There's your backstory. I mean, that's kind of the background. I think they did a good job of explaining everything, how this whole process took place. So now, the country is dry, no alcohol. And, there were a lot of people that were involved in this. I'd like to tell you about the award-winning author, Dr. Nancy Hendricks. Her book, Senator Hattie Caraway and Arkansas Legacy, offers a fresh look at Hattie Caraway, the first woman elected to the United States Senate, who was from right here in Arkansas. It was recently named by Cosmopolitan magazine as one of the 20 political books all women should read. You may have seen Nancy as Caraway in the film Hattie Caraway, The Silent Woman, which was shown on ATN. In addition, Nancy performs nationwide in her one-person program, Hattie to Hillary, Women in Politics. Among Nancy's honors are the Pryor Award for Arkansas History, the Arkansas Governor's Arts Award, the White House Millennium Bull Award, the Daughters of the American Revolution Women in American History Award. Nancy's most recent book, 100 Notable Women of Arkansas Women, received a great feature story in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette and was named an Arkansas Gem by the Arkansas State Library to be represented at the National Book Festival in Washington, D.C. But right now, our special guest is none other than Senator Hattie Caraway. Senator Caraway.
Thank you for that lovely welcome. It's wonderful to be here with you all today. As Larry said, I am Senator Hattie Caraway, the first woman elected to the United States Senate, and from right here in Arkansas. Now, we don't want to have any injuries from people stampeding out the door, because some of you may have seen the program that I do introducing myself to you. We're not going to do that today. But I do want to let you know, I was the first woman elected to the Arkansas. That strange new modern technical reverberation in back, if I start getting kind of strange here, I'm going to blame it on that. I was the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate. I was from right here in Arkansas. And I served from the years 1932 to 1945. Now, I died in the year 1950. And as I look around the room and I see some friendly faces, it is wonderful for me to be here with you today. But of course, having died in the year 1950, it's wonderful to be anywhere. But what I have to share with you today is a very small portion of my political career. You see, I was sworn into the Senate the same day that President Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated as president for the first time in 1933. And I was there for that vote on whether to repeal prohibition. I'm going to talk a little about what I did and why I did it in just a moment. But from up in heaven, we kind of monitor things, and I understand that here in beautiful Hot Springs Village, there's maybe one or two people that aren't originally from Arkansas. Is that a fair statement? Now, if you've never heard of Hattie Caraway, who was the first woman elected to the United States Senate, and if you've not heard about the connections of prohibition here in the Hot Springs area, please don't feel bad, because most Arkansans haven't either. But today we're going to shed a little light on it. And as I said, I'll talk about myself in a moment, but I'd like to share with you a little information about someone who lived here in Arkansas the very same time that I did, and had quite an impact on the topic here today. Her name was Carrie Nation. That is a formidable photo, is it not? She lived from the year 1846 to 1911, and she was famous for what she called smashing or hatchetations. vandalizing saloons, typically with hatchets. She believed she was not only inspired by God, but required by God to save America from the evils of alcohol. After marrying and divorcing an alcoholic man, she married her second husband, David Nation, who was a part-time preacher, newspaper editor, and lawyer. How's that for a trifecta? She said that in the year 1900, a voice told her, "Go to Kiowa." Now, Kiowa was a Kansas town, and those words were followed by the other words, "I'll stand by you." Now, she later said she interpreted those words as, "Take something in your hands and throw them at these places in Kiowa and smash them," which was kind of a stretch of the interpretive powers, but that is nonetheless how she interpreted them. At first, she used large rocks to smash the barroom's supply of liquor while she sang and prayed. After damaging several Kansas saloons, a tornado hit nearby, which she took as divine approval of her actions. She continued her attacks with rocks until her husband, David Nation, joked that maybe she should use a hatchet instead. She reportedly replied, "That's the most sensible thing you have said since I married you." They divorced soon after. Embarking on her hatchetations, she was arrested at least 30 times between 1900 and 1910 here in Arkansas, as well as Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. In Arkansas, she was jailed in Little Rock, and she was arrested here in Hot Springs, but was released when the mayor paid her $50 to speak at the opening of a new subdivision. Go Hot Springs. Carrie Nation made an additional $60 here in Hot Springs selling souvenir hatchets. In 1910, saying she wanted a quiet, healthy place to live, Carrie Nation moved to Eureka Springs. That's up in the northwest corner of the state. She bought a house at 35 Steel Street, and she named it Hatchet Hall. She led a subdued life there, taking in boarders and offering religious instruction. One night she reportedly dreamed that she would find pure water spring in the rock across the street from her home. After blowing up the boulder with dynamite and taking out a few windows, sure enough, water began flowing. And today, if you visit Eureka Springs, it's called the Carrie Nation Spring. During a speech in Eureka Springs in 1911, she suddenly gasped, "I have done what I could," before lapsing into a coma. She died on June 2nd, 1911, just a few years before the move towards prohibition that she had so hoped for would come to being. She died of what doctors said was organ failure, though some newspapers hinted at it being complications of syphilis. Now, this was not an unusual byproduct of the sale of alcohol at the time. You see, men would drink in saloons, and then they would visit the back room or the room upstairs. You see, Miss Kitty was not running a lending library upstairs. From the women of the night who occupied those rooms, the back rooms, the upstairs of saloons, men would contract venereal disease, which they would take home to their wives. So it was not an unusual byproduct of alcohol, which many women suffered through and caused them to have a certain opinion of alcohol. Now, Carrie Nation, when she died, left Hatchet Hall as a home for battered women, which again might speak to her own past. And though it's deteriorated, you can see that it somehow has. Hatchet Hall still stands in Eureka Springs. Closer to home, a wax image of Carrie Nation with her famous hatchet can be found in Josephine Tussaud's Wax Museum, right down on Central Avenue in Hot Springs. Now, if you think that the previous picture of Hattie was grim, wait till you see the wax image at Madame Tussauds. It's enough to make you want to take a trip down the street to the Ohio Club. But Hattie and I lived around the same time. We were contemporaries. And as I said, she did not live quite long enough to see Prohibition come into being. She died in the year 1911, and as you saw from the excellent video, the move took place during the 1900s and 1910s, and the unexpected effects of World War I, and how these all came together to bring about Prohibition. Now, I'd like to discuss just one aspect of that today because, as I said, the vote for repeal came under the vote of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933, which was the year I was sworn in to my full term in the Senate. Now, Prohibition ran from the years 1920 to 1933, and that was under the presidential administrations of Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover. Prohibition did not stop people from drinking. It simply created a nation of lawbreakers. Flouting Prohibition was so persuasive that in 1924 a new word had to be invented: scofflaws. Most people liked the term because they felt they were not criminals, they merely scoffed at an unpopular law. They felt they were just being fashionable. For many, and you may have had this sensation yourselves, being told that they couldn't have something made them crave it all the more. With too few lawmen making Prohibition hard to enforce, flouting the law was easy. A businessman might offer a drink to his customers to show how connected he was. Society matrons might pour cocktails at luncheon to show how modern and liberated they were. Small-town couples would serve drinks at dinner parties to show how sophisticated they were. Now, I don't usually quote Mr. Al Capone, but I must give credit where credit's due. You see, he was quoted as saying, "All I ever did was to sell beer and whiskey to our best people. Some of the leading judges use the stuff. When I sell liquor, it's called bootlegging. When my customers serve it on silver trays, it's called hospitality." Now, not many people would have argued with Mr. Capone under any circumstances. But in this case, he wasn't wrong. And I think we can bid farewell to Mr. Capone at this time. Thank you. There were regular bootleggers serving the U.S. Capitol, delivering liquor to the very lawmakers who made the rules for others to have to obey. Politicians at all levels publicly voted for Prohibition, while they privately continued to drink, including President Warren Harding and his cabinet in the White House. Hollywood did its part by providing such movies as Our Dancing Daughters in 1928 and 1929's Our Modern Maidens, both starring Joan Crawford as a girl who drinks openly and represents being true to oneself. In Modern Maidens, audiences completely understood a line by the butler: "Luncheon is poured." Many people felt that Prohibition was meant to prohibit someone else. They disliked the hypocrisy of 1929's Wickersham Committee, which was formed to make recommendations about Prohibition. The committee's findings were accurately summed up in the New York World newspaper. "Prohibition is an awful flop. We like it. It can't stop what it's meant to stop. We like it. It's left a trail of graft and slime. It don't prohibit worth a dime. It's filled our land with vice and crime. Nonetheless, we're for it." In voting against repeal, which I was one of the few senators to do in 1933, Though mine was not one of the more popular votes, I can at least say that I was not hypocritical. I did not support prohibition while secretly drinking. I did not approve of alcohol. But there's one other facet of that vote that might cause one to think. You see, it's the eternal question of the elected official. Do I vote my own conscience, or what my constituents who elected me to represent them would want me to do? You see, I come from a hometown called Jonesboro, Arkansas. It's up in the northeast corner of the state. And my hometown of Jonesboro, Arkansas, has prohibition to this day. It's called a dry county. Arkansas has 75 counties, 35 of them are dry. And lest we laugh at the quaint happenings across our country back in the long ago 1920s, of course, our country still has national prohibition today. It's called the war on drugs. The same criminal element is making millions, billions of dollars tax-free, and purchasers still find that buying it makes them somehow chic. But we can talk a little more about that, or we can have a wonderful program, which I know you are going to enjoy, by someone who was right there in the middle of bootlegging, not in some faraway place across the country, but right here in Hot Springs. And not just right here in Hot Springs, but right up the road in a place called the Dark Corner. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Jimmy Young. Jimmy?
Thank you. Get over here and find out from Larry, how do we get this slide going here, Larry? Right button. Thanks for coming out. I'm Jimmy Young. I'm from Hot Springs. Hold the mic? Okay. We'll work on that. You're going to have to tell me to move the slides too. I did my first. This is my second presentation at the Library for the Historical Society. Got on the first slide, talked for the next 35 or 40 minutes, finished and realized I never went past the first slide. We will move. Cullen Montgomery Baker. I started with Cullen Montgomery Baker. My great-great-great-grandfather, Tommy Young, came here to this area of North Garland County between 1822 and 1825. A couple of his family members followed him, his sister and his brother-in-law and their son, Cullen Montgomery Baker. I just threw this in because here in what is Dark Corner, that Garland, Perry County, this area up in here, this guy, if you want to go ahead and find some of the writings on him, was probably one of the most brutal men to ever live in American history. During the Confederate War, he was a mass murderer, is what he was. And when I found this guy, who is a distant cousin and Tommy Young, the first arrival to this area's nephew, I realized that Dave Young, who was later born in this area here, was a choir boy in comparison. And Dave was indicted 3 times for murder and unindicted for a 4th murder, and then was killed in a gunfight on Central Avenue with his detective service partner. This is the Young family here in this area in 1908. My grandfather, at the highest point, Tompie, T-O-M-P-I-E, his brother Jess, his brother George, who we'll see a slide of later, Monroe to the lower left, Bill Young, who was my grandfather, my dad's dad, Dave, who was the fellow I just mentioned that was indicted 3 times for murder, unindicted for a 4th murder, and killed in a gunfight on Central Avenue, is to the right of my grandfather, Bill Young. To Dave's right is William Jones Young. Thomas Young, the first arrival in the area's firstborn in Arkansas. This is a 50th wedding anniversary in 1908. His wife, Bithynia, to his right. Over to the far right, Albert and John, brothers. There were 12 children, not all in this photograph. This was the core of the men that started making moonshine in this area up here in the 1880s and continued. Well, I'll show some slides of my great-grandfather on my mom's side from up in this area. And he was having half gallons of moonshine delivered to his porch in Hot Springs in the 1980s. Dave, this cabin still stands on the Ed Oates farm on Oates Loop, just north of Jessieville. You see Oates Loop to the left. Just a short distance down Oates Loop, about a quarter of a mile, I believe you can look down in the pasture, and this cabin's still standing. This cabin was built in 1876, I believe, by my great-great-great-grandfather, John Oates. Many years later, Bill Young, my grandfather, and his wife, Flora Oates, lived in this cabin when Bill began making moonshine. Bill had his first child, Kathleen, in this cabin. And near this cabin, he was busted around 1918 for the first time at 19 years old for making moonshine. As the federal agents surrounded his still, in the quiet of the morning, his partner, by the last name Wilson, broke for the woods, and an agent shot and killed him. Bill Young went to Little Rock twice to federal court, and probably due to the shooting of Wilson, got off, and large sums of money as well. 2 years passed. Bill went immediately back to making moonshine. Once he got settled back in, he was busted again. He had left this cabin and gone over to Marble Church. How many of you know where the old Marble Church is? You can find it back here. That's really where the dark corner area is. Jessieville School, turn right, and follow the Marble Church signs to back in there. And they had rented another cabin, was given a cabin by another man. My dad was born in 1920, James Evelyn Young. My grandfather Bill walked onto the cabin porch at dawn one morning 2 years after his first bust, and the revenuers, as he described it, came out from behind absolutely every tree in sight with pistols and rifles aimed directly at him. He had my father in his arms. His mind flashed back to Wilson having been unarmed and shot dead, running from the first bust, and screamed, "I have a baby in my arms, please don't shoot." Bill was arrested, bailed out. His uncles, let me go back there, Dave, George, Monroe, and John had all moved into town during that period of time. Dave had already been killed in a gunfight in 1918, 2 years prior, on Central Avenue. Dave was killed in a gunfight with his detective service partner, Green Brown, on Central Avenue. This is after he had been indicted 3 times for other murders. We'll have a little slide on that in a second. And so after Bill went to court again and wasn't put in prison due to the amount of money and good lawyers and good connections over in Hot Springs that he had, Bill and my dad moved into Hot Springs. This is Dave Young, arguably one of the meanest men to ever live in Hot Springs. Had a tremendous temper, and it could be found on the right side of the law quite often. He wore a badge, was on the police department, was in one of his indictments was for the police sheriff department shootout, which was the OK Corral shootout in Hot Springs between the police department and the sheriff's department, I believe, which 5 men were killed on Central Avenue. Dave was indicted in that. This was 1893, another murder he was indicted for, which seemed that evidence as you read some of the historical accounts of the trial that he was pretty guilty. He got off on this one as well. He and Jeff Fulton, Dave owned multiple saloons in Hot Springs, as well as wearing a badge. And there are many, many stories where he was on the right side of the law and performed great feats of courage. And yet his temper, when he would walk away from that job of operating his saloon, seemed to get him in a lot of trouble. This is another Dave Young shot here. There's another Dave Young shot. Here is the advertisement for one of his saloons that he had over a period of time, the Blue Barrel Whiskey House. And that's a pretty interesting ad there. One drink or a 40-gallon barrel. Jeff Fulton, who was indicted with him on the murder at one time. This is a business card of Dave Young's at another saloon he owned, the Falstaff Bar. And look at the details on that. Old Dave, $15 million, $30 capital in my dreams. Let's get acquainted, Dave Young. A ragtime millionaire, Falstaff Bar. This is the back of his card. Ma's boy Dave. No home, no gals, no diamonds, no friends, no money, no nothing. Poor Dave. Just booze, that's all. He was connecting with his brothers and uncles and other family members right here in Dark Corner. The moonshine flowed down from that area into Hot Springs. The baseball players, if you know that history, were here. The gamblers were here. The folks were here for the hot baths. They even had a way of putting a tree bark in the moonshine and curing it like bourbon, and just the bark would turn that moonshine into a bourbon-colored golden, and they would peddle that for bourbon. So they were actually selling bourbon moonshine to these ball players, these tourists, these gamblers that would come for the horse races. And, it was quite a market down here. This is the badge that Bill Young later, who became house detective of the Arlington Hotel, somewhere around 1928. Bill Young's badge, Garland County Sheriff's Department, it's got W.A. Young. My grandfather was William Alfred Young. One of his uncles, Dave's brother, the youngest of the young children from this area up here, was George Washington Young. And George's pistol, that was a Colt 38 that George carried. It's still in the family. George was the oldest active law officer in America at 97. He was on the cover of National Enquirer. There he is. There's George Young at 97. Right out of Dark Corner and down on the lower right when he was a constable for this county, for this area up here. And that was his mule when he would ride posses. And it's amazing how someone can bridge such history, because I was 13, 14, 15 years old before he passed away. His brother was Dave Young, who was killed in 1918 in a gunfight on Central Avenue. So Uncle George made it into National Enquirer. There he is with his mule, George and his trusty steed, a mule when he was 17. Crooks today are softies, George says, unlike Jesse James, who was really tough. There's another shot of that. There's the photo to the right. That's my dad, James Evelyn Young, and Bill Young, who, after those two busts, set up a station with some of the Marriott family, who was from this area up here, where Ed's Chicken Dinner, do you remember where Ed's was? Not where it is now. I don't even think it's called Ed's now. At the junction of 5 and 7 going into town, the corner as you turn into Hot Springs to the right there, became a liaison. It was a cover in the form of a small building where tires were fixed on cars and horses were watered. But it was a AM hours transfer point for moonshine. My grandfather, Bill Young, who in that picture there during World War II, my dad and Bill Young, Bill on the left. Bill became house detective. During that period that the second trial was over, 23 through 27 or so, he was a liaison for the moonshiners in Garland County to Hot Springs, and brought that moonshine down to that station there at 5 and 7, where it would be carried on in an AM hours. This is Leo McLaughlin in Oral Albritton's book, Leo and Vern. W.A. Bill Young is mentioned just days after Leo McLaughlin was elected in 1927 for his first term as mayor. He appointed a new police department, and William Alfred Young, my grandfather, was appointed by Leo as a patrolman, and that was just right at about the same time that they made him house detective at the Arlington Hotel. This was the GI group that ran against the old machine and was supposed to be reformers, although they weren't too reform-minded once they got into office. There's the badge that grandfather wore at the Arlington Hotel when he was house detective. He had a run-in with Bugsy Siegel at the hotel. Siegel's girlfriend, Siegel, had checked into the Arlington Hotel, unbeknownst to my grandfather, who would look at the register regularly. He had been out on the street for a few hours. He came back and went back to the marble stairs overlooking the lobby. One of his jobs was to keep prostitutes out, ladies of ill repute, and he fancied himself having a good eye. In through the revolving door came a gal that was dressed as perfectly to be figured out as someone that shouldn't be there, as he could figure out, and he went and turned her back out the door and said, "Leave," and she protested. He said, "I said, get out of here." Went back in and took a station in the lobby with his back to the elevators, watching to see if she came back. About 4 minutes later, she had gone, found a phone, and called Siegel in his room. Siegel came out of the elevators, took my grandfather by the shoulder, spun him around, and held him by the collar and said, "You short, fat SOB. I'm about to throw you off the roof of this place. That was my girl you put out here." And Bill Young was beyond tough. Bill looked him in the eye and said, "Don't know who you are, but you better get ready to hit with me." And they backed off, buddied up, visited with each other, cleared it up. And Siegel visited a couple more times, and each time he would come, he would hand my grandfather 3 $100 bills. Say, "Bill, keep one and pass the other 2 around." So he was had quite the job as house detective. House detectives at the hotels were the in between the mob visitors, the out-of-town visitors that did not need to mingle with each other due to the fact that they killed each other at home. Back home, they were killing each other. They were killed here in Hot Springs, prided itself in that there was never a murder between the factions that would come here. And the house detective was very important in that they would speak to the police department, speak to the hotel owners, find out who's coming, and then go to the gambling houses and so forth, say, "Mr. Siegel, Mr. Capone, Mr. Ralph Capone's coming, Mr. Siegel's coming, Mr. Costello's coming. Would you like to host him?" When they would arrive, they would say, "The Southern Club has asked that you come. They have meals prepared, they have tables for you, private table. Would you like to be their guest?" Sure, we would. They kept the factions separated, and in that way kept them from gambling in the same places and getting into fights and arguments and Tommy guns coming out. This is over on Budry Circle. This house stands today. It's the farm that was the Sharp D and Cynthia Glenn farm. Sharp D and Cynthia are on the Old Marble Church charter in 1848. The firstborn of Tommy Young in Arkansas, William Jones Young, married a Glenn. And this was their home. It still stands. or on the farm. There were several buildings and several houses. This is a corn crib that still stands till today. You go down Beaudry Circle, several miles on the right, you'll see this corn crib. My dad, born in 1920, had already moved by 27, was in town with his father, Bill, who was about to become a house detective. And Dad remembers this corn booth being a voting booth for this area. He recalls being a 6 or 7-year-old boy out here playing to the left, and down in those woods where you see the taller grass, there's a spring. His father, Tommy Young, and his dad, Bill Young, he noticed while he was playing, were walking men down to the spring. They would visit, they had some sheets of paper. The men would come back up, and he said, at my age, after a short time, I noticed something. When they would come back up, they had a pint of moonshine in their back pocket. So this was one of 4 elections that my family and extended family were involved in absolutely fixing in Hot Springs. And this one was around 1927 with pints of moonshine that they were buying votes. This to the left is my dad, James Evelyn Young, who owned several gambling operations in Hot Springs. At 12 years old, he coveted, 10 years old, he coveted the job of chalkboard man. He watched through the window at Citizen Cigar Store, where Spencer's Corner is now. And he saw the man write gambling results on the board in beautiful handwriting. And he said, I want to do that someday. So at 12 years old, he talked him into letting him write on the chalkboard results. And he got somewhat of a little weekend job at 12 years old, writing gambling results on the chalkboard on a regular basis, and went on to book horses and football and baseball for a living, almost for the rest of his life. In the center is Bill Young and Bob Murray. Bill, my grandfather, went from the 2 busts here in Dark Corner making moonshine to liaison for the moonshine makers at the junction of 5 and 7 to being house detective. This was during the period in the 30s when he was house detective at the Arlington Hotel. Bob Murray to the right was his assistant house detective. The badge that you saw was under his coat right there. He wore that daily. Bill Young to the right. One of his jobs in between that 1921-22 moving to town and the good things that came along with house detective, he had a fish market. He loved fishing. This was my dad's club from the 1960 to 67 to the end of gambling area, the Frontier Club, which still stands across from Oaklawn. If you get a hold of my book, I tell about being raised in this area and several stories. How many of you are from Chicago? Anybody from Chicago? Forgive me. I wrote the chapter in my book, Chicago Go Home. My dad, Ed Young, he really did raise us and specifically tell us not to be prejudiced and to judge people according to their actions, not their color or where they're from or whatever. But we kind of got a wake-up call by the time we could realize. We found out he did not like Chicago Yankees. He had a terrible distaste for Chicago Yankees. And in my book, I tell several reasons and several stories about things that he did that prove that. There's Bill Clinton, and my dad's best boyhood friend at our lake house, a fundraiser when he was in state office. And that's me down behind him in the back right there at some function. Grew up 6/10 of a mile from Bill on Oaklawn Boulevard, and he was over on Scully Street, just a couple blocks away. That was my dad's pistol, hammerless .38, some of his brass knuckles. Up to the left, the 2 men, my father, and to the left, Judge Earl Mazander, who was his best friend, municipal judge here in town. Bud Canada was a good lifetime friend that was a state senator. Q. Byram Hurst was a good friend of my dad's. Marion Anderson, who was a sheriff for many years back in those days. This is a promotion of, we're going to have these guys here in a few minutes. The Fun City Chorus is going to come in and sing a few songs. We're about done here. I'm not going to go through all of these, I don't believe. This is Saturday night, the Woodlands. Hope you guys are planning on coming. and it's in there. It should be a few more, but here we go. Up in this area, 1848 to 1925 on my mother's side was DeCal Caldwell. My great-grandfather, who I knew quite well, who was the man Frank Caldwell on the family tree out to the right, born in 1876 here in this area, on my mother's side. He had moonshine delivered. This is DeCal Caldwell, the first arrival of the Caldwells here. And then there's Frank, my great-grandfather. He had banana trees in Hot Springs. He was the first. That's Frank to the far right in that photo, Frank Caldwell, up here in this area, North Shore of Lake Ouachita. There's Frank when he grew the first stalk of bananas ever in the history of Hot Springs. There's Frank, and the reason I put these two in here with the bananas is because as a boy I would go to this house in Hot Springs over by what was Second Baptist Church, and on Saturday mornings up into the 70s, I said 80s earlier, up into the 70s, he passed in his hundreds around, middle 70s. He would have a half gallon of moonshine up into the 70s delivered every Saturday morning into those banana trees. So he called it his Kickapoo soy juice. And so the old guy was one of the last of that era of moonshining from this area. Here's my mom's side, Irish immigrant in the center, the older guy with the cap, Patsy Dugan. Orville Albritton wrote The Gunfights of Hot Springs, and Dave Young is featured in multiple chapters of that book. Patsy Dugan, my great-grandfather, Irish immigrant, to the left of the horse, was barkeeper for Colonel Doran of the Flynn-Doran battles, which is the second most notorious gunfight that happened in Hot Springs. So I had a great-grandfather and a great-great-uncle in the two most famous gun battles of Hot Springs, Patsy Dugan. My grandfather in front of the tree to the right, Jimmy Dugan. Time allowed, I would tell about a fixed election by Jimmy Dugan, Sheriff Marion Anderson here in Hot Springs. And I would tell about a fixed election between my dad and McLaurin's Barbecue Bottle election. That's another story. There was the great-grandfather Patsy Dugan Saloon in Hot Springs, one of several. Like Dave Young, Patsy Dugan owned several saloons. This is a contract for an 1886 contract for a mine that he was buying, and the letterhead is from his saloon, P.J. Dugan's Horseshoe Exchange Saloon and Restaurant. And he was buying a mine from some other men, and this was a contract. I'll have this flyer outside. I sold most of my books at the radio book signing this morning that I didn't know we were going to have. And I bought enough books for this event, brought enough books, and they all sold just about. There's a couple. And I've got a flyer that we can grab today if you want to. Belvedere. I think that must be the end. Thank you so much for coming down. Any questions?
Now that Frontier Club that you showed up there, is that where Rocky's Corner is?
It's a block down from Rockies, a block south from Rockies. And one of the Rockies used to be the Shamrock Cafe and Liquor Store. And in my Chicago Go Home chapter, my dad takes a fellow from Chicago and puts him a foot off the ground against the wall because he said something to me that upset me. Yeah, the Frontier Club is still there. You know, we've got some guys here now, I hope I didn't go too long, that the stage production of the Cigar Box Men was written by none other than Steve Spanks, the Fun City Chorus. And the fellas from the Fun City Chorus are going to come and serenade us and give us a little idea of what you might see Saturday night. Yes?
Are your artifacts at the Gangster Museum?
No, they're not.
They're not.
No. They're in a safe.
They're safe. They're safe.
They're safe. Don't come looking for them. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Jamie. We've got, trying to look back here and see if these guys are ready. Are y'all ready?
I think we are. We're coming in now.
Okay. I've got, when they get through, I've got a couple of videos that I want to show you if you want to stick around. One is actually shot at the Belvedere Club in the 30s. And I mean, this is video I digitized for the Garland County Historical Society. And then I've got another video just a short one, that I'd like to show you about Arbordale. How many of you know where Arbordale is? Have you heard of Arbordale? If you go down 5, just past Fountain Lake, you'll see a big gate, the white columns. Have you ever wondered what was down that road? I'm going to show you. So anyway, this Saturday, 2 and 7, the Fun City Chorus is going to present the Cigar Box Men. I saw this production over in Hot Springs last fall. In fact, I videoed it for them, and these guys have a lot of fun. And they have kind of done something. They did the boys' summer, the baseball thing, and now they're doing the dark corn. I don't know what else these guys are going to do. Trust me. Right. So anyway, the leader of the Fun City Chorus, Mr. Steve Spakes.
I hope you'll take the opportunity to come to the show Saturday night. Jimmy tells some historical facts in the show that I'm sure he probably didn't mention here. Just so much amazing things about the history of Hot Springs. It's just crazy. And I really understand the saying that says, truth is stranger than fiction. That's such a truism for sure. How many folks in here, I don't know if Jimmy talked about this, are familiar with what used to be called Ed's Eat Shop? Yeah. Okay. I've eaten fried chicken out there several times way back when I was about 15 or 16 years old, and it was in operation. You know what that was when they first built it? When it first was built back in I want to say the late 1800s. Ed's Eat Shop basically repaired wagon wheels and tires on trucks and things. It was like a tire repair shop. But that wasn't the real business. The real business happened out behind Ed's Eat Shop. And that's where the moonshine trade will be bought and sold and delivered, out behind Ed's Eat Shop. Hey, Jimmy, is that true?
That's true.
Okay, so that's from the horse's mouth. That's true. I remember in kind of talking with Jimmy and trying to write this show, I'd go, okay, now we're going to do da-da-da, here's this character. And, he said, well, no, that was the grandmother. That wasn't the niece. And I go, no, he was the uncle. He wasn't the grandpa. I said, well, Jimmy, you got to take a little bit of artistic liberty with what you do on stage to make it fit. It's a great little storyline to the show. And the little girl who stars in this, Roxana Collingwood, it is worth the price of admission just to come see her. She is tremendous. We just love working with her. Fun show. You'll really love it. We're going to do a couple of songs from that show for you. But we're going to start off and say if I say, give me an old barbershop song, what song comes to mind? What image do you get in your mind? Okay, Lila Rose. Sweet Adeline. Thank you. Huh? Down by the old Mill Stream.
Keep guessing.
So here's one about the Rose song, and it's called My Wild Irish Rose. So I get a picture of a barbershop quartet with the straw hats and the striped jackets standing underneath a lamp pole singing this song. My wild Irish rose, the sweetest flower that grows. You may search everywhere, but none can compare with my wild Irish rose, my wild tell you what that song's about. There's not a person in this room that would guess what that song's about. That song is about, to put it real nicely, a lady of ill repute. And I think this guy, she's probably stepping away from that profession, and this is the guy who wrote the song about this girl who now is going to be his wild Irish rose. So here's a song we do on the Cigar Box Men show, and it was one of the featured songs on our Boys of Baseball show a couple of years ago. I love this song, and I hope you enjoy it from way back, and I'm going to say this is probably a 20s song, maybe in the teens, called Sitting on Top of the World. I'm sitting on top of the world, just swinging along, just going along, because I'm quitting the blues of the world, just singing a song, just singing a song. Glory, hallelujah, I just want the voice of a party ready to call. Just like Humpty Dumpty, I'm ready to fall because I'm sitting on top of the world. Just rolling along, just rolling along. I'm sitting on top of the world, rolling along, rolling along. I'm quitting the blues of the world, just singing a song, just singing a song. Glory, hallelujah, I just hold the horse of a party ready to call. Just like Humpty Dumpty, I'm ready to fall because I'm sitting on top of the world, just singing a song, just singing a song. I'm sitting on top of the world. So we thank you guys for letting us be just a small part of what's going on here today, and thank you, Larry, for the invite. We're going to sing a song that is fast become one of our favorites. Now, this is not really a barbershop song. I think it's probably kind of borders on maybe bluegrass, and we do a couple of tunes like this in the show. Also featured in this show is, along with Roxana Collingwood, who's the star of the show. Her daddy played by Clyde Adams, a local country western singer here, just got a gorgeous voice. And then Top of the Rock chorus from Little Rock, a ladies chorus of about 50 ladies will be on the stage. Now our chorus combines with Top of the Rock, and we sing Down to the River to Pray from the movie Oh Brother Where Art Thou? You know, the big baptismal scene, and we're going to baptize folks in this Saturday night. Really, this has probably been one of the most fun shows that we've ever done. It's just a fun show to perform and sing, so I hope you'll come catch us Saturday in the woods. And we're going to give the lead role on this song to Mr. Doug Calloway here. All right, Doug, take it away.
All right, y'all ready?
Ready.
The place where he was the morning.